My name is Kate Wisniewski, and I'm here with the Office of Congressman Renacci on August 7th, 2017 with Richard Rozman, and we will be conducting a Veterans History Project interview. All right, so where were you born, Richard?
In Cleveland, Ohio.
Do you remember what year or?
In 1922. I guess it was December 22nd.
Very cool. And then, who were your parents? Do you remember their names?
My father's name was Gustav, and he died prematurely. And my mother was Frances, and she was with me for many years.
And then, did you have any siblings or?
I had one sister, Dorothy, and she was about 2 years older than me, and we grew up in the same house in Cleveland Heights, and went to the same schools: Fairfax Elementary, Roxborough Junior High, and Cleveland Heights High. That's it.
Okay.
Then from after that, why then I got a job, and after I was working, then I went to a different company. I went to the Aluminum Company of America, and that was on Denison Avenue, I think. And they hired me as a draftsman, and so I was there for, I don't know, a year, 2 years. I don't remember exactly how long.
Okay, and then did you go into the service after that, or?
Yes, I guess I had a strange beginning, because I had originally signed up when the National Guard outfit that I was in, when they're being called into the Army, they had to have, I guess, my mother's approval, because at the time I was either 18 or under 18, and I think they said she wouldn't give me approval, and so they had to drop me out of the organization. And then from then on, I guess I was on my own in different jobs, and finally wound up at the Aluminum Company of America, and that was interesting, seeing them how they make propellers for airplane engines, and crankcases for the engines, and other aluminum forged parts. Forged part is where they smash the aluminum together, and then they forge that part, and then when they have it down to a certain thickness, and then they take it off, and they will make parts out of it.
And is that what inspired you to go into the military, or?
Gee, I can't think now what interested me in going into the military. I I can recall is that I was in a National Guard outfit, and we used to go out on weekends, and they sort of played cops and robbers in the streets of Shaker Heights, and then they'd run around and I guess try to find each other. And at the time, I was assigned as a radio operator, and so I had nothing, really not much to do. But after that, then I guess I can't think exactly when I went into the service.
Were you enlisted or did you get drafted?
I enlisted, but I just can't remember the exact location I was.
Mm-hmm. No worries.
And but I had enlisted, and it was after the I think it was after the war broke out, and then they started drafting people into the service then.
Okay.
And but it seems like a confused life.
What branch of the military did you serve in then?
What phrase?
What branch? Were you in the Army or the Air Force?
Well, I was in the Army, and I don't remember when I got into the Air Force. I just don't remember how I got into it.
No worries. So, do you remember what your basic training was like, or kind of the early days of the service?
Well, gee. The basic training was confusing because they would send you from one camp to another camp and tell you learn a certain procedure, and then when you learned it, well, then they would send you to another one.
So were you in the U.S. during that time when you were getting sent from camp to camp? Were you in the United States?
I was at home.
Okay.
I wasn't actually in an Army organization. I didn't go in until oh gosh, I want to say 1943, and I'm not sure if that's the right year or not. But I don't know how I came to wind up in the Air Corps. I remember taking tests and coming down to Columbus, where they had a testing unit, and they would test fellows to see if they were qualified for any particular branch.
Okay. And then, so do you remember, what was the test written, or was it based on skills?
Both. It was both written and they had some tests were set up so that you had to do certain things, I guess to understand if you could operate the machinery, or it wasn't the bomb site because they weren't turning that information over to the Army yet.
Okay. So after that test, where did you end up going? Is that when you went to the Air Corps?
Yes, it was after the test. I guess I was still at home on Croydon Road. And then I can't remember exactly how I went on active duty, but I guess I volunteered enough to get into the Air Corps, and then I went through a couple stages of testing, and then I got orders, printed orders to report to Columbus, Ohio. I can't think what field it was, but there was some organization in Columbus, and where they brought the fellows in from what was then called the 5th Corps area, and they assembled them in Columbus. I don't think it was Keesler Field, but they got us together in an area in Columbus, and then they marched us off and put us on a train, and from there the train took us to I think might have been Keesler Field in Biloxi, and we were at that time, we were in Mississippi, and we were so sure that we were going to wind up in what they called the Eastern Flying Training Command, that I remember having a lottery, and so we would pick where we might be going, and in my organization, everybody was picking states east of the Mississippi, and we didn't wind up there. We wound up west of the Mississippi, and that's when we went to Texas, and after I think we were about 5 weeks in basic training, and then they put us on a train and sent us to Texas. I can't think of the name of the town now, but Keesler Field in Mississippi was very humid, and we could get dressed for supper, and by the time we got to supper, why, we were soaking wet, and because we perspired so much. And then they put us on a train and sent us to Texas, and when we got there, it was so dry that we never perspired. But I wasn't there long, and I had to go on sick call, and I remember some MD sticking a thermometer in my mouth, and he, after a couple minutes, he took it out and looked at it, and he threw it in the wastebasket. And I guess he thought that it was defective, so they gave me another thermometer to keep in my mouth. And they said, well, get your bags. And I said, well, I'm assigned to this organization. He said, no, you're going home. This is a reassignment because of a fever I had. And so I have to, after getting to that point, they sent me home for about 5 weeks for recuperation. And I remember coming back here to Cleveland and really doing nothing but just trying to get well, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was reassigned and went back down to Texas and into a different outfit. And and then from there on, then they moved me into different phases of the Air Corps cadet program, and I wound up going to flying school. And I thought I hoped to become a pilot, but when I went through, they didn't need pilots. They needed navigators and bombardiers. And so then they sent me to navigation school. And then I spent the next, I don't know, 5 or 6 months in the navigation school, I guess. And then from there, I guess I finished there, and then they sent me to another school. It's hard to keep track of all the different schools they sent us to, but it was how they needed people, and if they had a need for a certain number of guys to go into a navigation school, well, then they would pick that many guys and send them off that way. And whether it was bombardiers or navigators or pilots or whatever they might be. And from then on, the Army was telling us where we were going, and we didn't have much choice.
So where did you end up going after all of your training and?
Where did I end up?
Mm-hmm.
See, trying to think of where I wound up. I know I was down in Texas for a while. Well, I guess then they didn't discharge us, but they reassigned us, and I was assigned to a group that met up near Sacramento, California. And from there, they put us in crews. And that was the first time I met the crews that I flew with later on. So, but they bounced us around quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
We got to know a lot of different people.
How many people were in your crew then, that you, on average?
When it started out with, there was 10, and then they dropped 1, so we were dropped down to 9. And the 10th one was the ball turret gunner, and decided they didn't want the ball turrets on the airplanes anymore. They weren't effective, so they stopped putting those in, and we had 9 in the crew. We had a tail gunner, a couple waist gunners, an engineer, a radio operator, I guess we had a nose gunner, and an upper turret gunner. I didn't count all the people that, but there were 9 of us anyhow that wound up as a crew.
Mm-hmm. So what was your part on the crew?
I was a navigator. In other words, they would give us a destination where we were going to go and the maps, and then I would tell the pilot that when we took off, they were going to head in a certain direction, and hopefully we would get there.
Were you close with the people on your plane? Like, did you develop friendships?
There was some. When we were on the ground, the enlisted men were grouped in a certain area, and the officers were in a different area. And I was in with the officers, and so I lived with with who? There were two of us that lived together, and then I don't remember exactly where we went after that, because we were assigned to crews, and then we trained as a crew.
Did you serve in the Pacific at all, or were you in Europe?
Pacific.
Do you remember what that experience was like? So, was it warm down there, or anything like that that you
was it what?
Share?
Warm?
Yeah.
Yeah. We went from California. We flew to Hawaii, and we got to Hawaii, and then they sent us off to I don't know, maybe it was Guam that we were sent to first.
Mm-hmm.
And because they didn't need us right then, so they're sort of stockpiling the people in different bases until they needed them, and then they put out the call for them. But I think that's where I came across the name. Can't think of the name now. I should have written it down. Well, it wasn't Lockbourne. That was California. I just can't remember. They sent us to a different place there in Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
And the war was winding down at that time, and I think for a while we spent time at a place called Barking Sands Air Force Base, which was on an island near near the main island of Hawaii, and then from there I don't know if we flew any bombing missions out of there or not. I don't think we did. I think the war was about over then.
Mm-hmm.
And then what they did was they outfitted our bomber planes with Beechcraft or bleacher seats.
Okay.
And each Beechcraft, because what happened, the Japanese were holding a lot of not Americans, but a lot of prisoners of war, and making them work
Mm-hmm.
in road gangs and whatever they had to do, and wow, what to do? I can remember then. I guess we probably were sent to Guam, because I remember going and swimming in the Pacific near Guam. But of course there was the water all around you, so
Mm-hmm.
it didn't make a difference where you went.
So what was a typical mission like? Do you remember kind of what it, like if you could go through what it was like?
Do what?
One of your, like the missions that you go on, what was like a typical, like how did it work?
Well, they would assign us a certain destination, bombing target, and then give that information to the pilot, and the pilot would tell us what we had to do, and we would map out the route, and then the pilot and the co-pilot would fly the plane on that route that we had designated.
Mm-hmm.
And but we were flying alone, and there was not many people or many planes together like it was in Europe. In
Mm-hmm.
Europe, when they had bombing missions, why they had hundreds of planes that were going from one place, often England or North Africa. They were bombing targets in Europe, and but they didn't have that need, because they weren't doing bombing, making that many missions, and so we. Wow, we trying to think what we did after that. I don't remember. It's sort of a blank.
You are good. So when you had like free time, other than swimming, did you do anything else fun, or when you were overseas?
Well, other than living in a tent that we set up on the grounds, and had bug sprays and mosquito netting that we had to drape around, because there were a lot of insects that were also seeking the same place. But I remember we went swimming at one point, and then I don't know if I was with a different member of the crew, and we had hitched a ride from where he picked us up near Water's Edge someplace, and to drive us back up into the Guam area where we were stationed. And I remember being picked up and riding in the back of a Jeep, and then we would take off the road and be going through the jungles. And every so often you would hear a command out of the darkness, you know, stop, you know, who goes there? And it's because we had people that were defending our gasoline tanks that were stationed in those areas. And they were worried that the Japanese might get in there and mess it up and destroy what they had set up. But I can remember going in the jungle, riding the Jeep, and every so often you hear, halt, who goes there? And the Jeep would have to stop, and he would get out and identify himself in the headlight, and then it was okay, and then he'd get back in and we'd move on to a different area. Until we did that a few times until we got back close enough to a road that would take us back to our living area. And then from that time on, we stayed in that living area until our bombing runs were done.
Okay. So what was your favorite part of your experience?
My favorite experience?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my. I have a hard time thinking of what my favorite was. When we were flying our missions, just to assemble, and the pilot was in charge, and he everybody would be grouped, and we would tell them where we're going to fly, and then we'd all get in the plane and take off. But it was a wide open area. The Pacific is pretty wide, and it wasn't that you had smaller targets like in Europe or Africa. We were going from island to island, and then, as I say, when the war ended, then we started bringing back the fellows who had been captured by the Japanese, and many of them were, or some of them were Australians, and some English, and the other, I can't think of what other nationalities there were that they had that the Japanese had been tying up, but then they got set so they were releasing those captured soldiers, and we'd fill a plane with them, and instead of having bombs in them, we had soldiers that we were, and then we'd fly them down to the Philippines from there, and then from there, we don't know where they went. That was up to the Army to decide that.